Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the CCA Living Room. I'm Jason Silverman, the Cinematheque Director, and I want to thank you all for being here and thank the CCA crew for making this happen. We're about to have a really spectacular program of trick films, silent films, films that were made with a bunch of cinematographic creativity in the early days, plus some surrealistic treasures. It's part of our ongoing Living Room series, which is bringing you virtual entertainment and storytelling in the time of COVID. It's been a really incredible experiment. I hope you guys are all staying safe at home. We miss you in the theater and hope to see you there very soon, once it's safe. We've had a bunch of wonderful programs. I know a lot of you have been with us for many of them, but I'm especially excited about tonight's program with Ken Winokur and Kirk Ellis. I wanted to say that if you have questions for Kirk or Ken, you can use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen, bottom of my screen. Click on that and just type it in, and then we will relay those to these guys so they can answer your questions. We have a program on Saturday with Mira Burek, I got her name right, who is an artist whose work is being will be displayed at the CCA once we open our galleries again. Check that out, and a whole bunch of other upcoming programs are listed at the CCA website. All kinds of good stuff happening, multiple days a week. So Kirk Ellis has been a great friend to the arts in Santa Fe, in particular to the CCA for years and years. He is a generous soul and also one of America's great screenwriters. He's best known for his work with John Adams, a series that he wrote and produced and won 472 Golden Globes for. Is that the right number? I can't remember the right number. Maybe it was 473. It's a great time to watch that again if you're ready to stream something ambitious and wonderful. Ken Winokur has altered the way I see movies. He is a founder of the LA Orchestra, which is generally acknowledged to be the greatest silent film ensemble in the universe. I've seen probably 20 different films that the Alloy has scored over the last 30 years. We brought Ken and Alloy to New Mexico for a statewide tour some years back, and I just love what they do. Not only the creation of the music, but the deep understanding of cinema. You watch these films that were made back in the day, and this isn't the kind of carpeting music that you would hear on a lot of silent film DVDs. This is music that really seeks to interface with the films in new ways. And so I think you're going to have fun watching these trick films with Ken and Kirk tonight. I'm going to pass it over to Kirk to get things started. Thanks again for being here.
Great, thank you, Jason. This is a real privilege because I've been a fan of silent films from my early adolescence, and they're a really misunderstood art form. People think of silent films as deeply strange. They're in black and white, they move at the wrong speed, they've got terrible tinny piano accompaniment, but they're also great works of art. And when you have somebody like Ken who knows how to match music to picture, you see these films in a completely different light. It should be understood that from the beginning, silent films were never silent. There was always some sort of musical accompaniment, either some tinny barroom piano, in the case of large movies, a full symphony orchestra. But they've come down to us marred by the poor soundtracks that have always been attached to them. And Alloy Orchestra, which I had the pleasure to see at the CCA, at the Telluride Film Festival, and listen to them all the time with their accompaniment to great silent films on Turner Classic Movies, really show how, with the proper underscore, these films can become very contemporary. And I want you to remember, as you're watching these films tonight, the youngest movie we're showing you is 100 years old. Some of them are even earlier than that. So you'll see how sound and picture can really, really work to keep things contemporary. So I want to introduce Ken and begin a dialogue about his process in bringing new sounds to old celluloid. Ken?
Well, pleased to be here. Pleased to be associated with the CCA again, where we did an amazing show some years back and actually stayed a few nights in your residence.
So, Ken, could you talk about your process, how you come to this art? What defines the score that you do for specific film?
Well, the film itself defines the score. We always, slightly jokingly, but seriously say that the film is our director and our conductor. We don't have a conductor. We have a three-piece orchestra, typically thought of as a band. Keyboard player, Roger Miller, two percussionists, Terry Donahue and myself. We double on some other instruments, clarinet, accordion, some guitar, whatever. And we attempt to elucidate what we feel is the director's perspective in the film and make it kind of larger than life for the viewers in the audience.
So how did you come to this pass in life? I'm going to score old silent films. What was it about that art that made you want to reimagine the music for them?
Well, how I came to it was circuitously. I had so many different professions. I was a journalist, a photography writer and critic. I was a professional photographer and always a musician. And the music was always kind of a hobby. And the other things were, I was trying to make a living very poorly. And a local film programmer named David Kleiler, who was programming this wonderful neighborhood movie theater, but kind of an Art Deco palace as well, called the Coolidge Corner in Boston, just outside Brookline, Massachusetts, very casually asked my partner, Caleb Sampson, who I've been doing a lot of different musical projects with, if we wanted to throw together a score for Metropolis. He was going to show the film Metropolis. This is in 1991. The film had a nice restoration that had happened about 6 years before, but they had chosen to accompany the film with a series of rock and roll and disco hits by the likes of Freddie Mercury of Queen, Pat Benatar, Adam Ant, Loverboy. It was a completely outrageous idea of how to do a score for a silent film. Nobody had done something like that.
That was the Giorgio Moroder version of it. I remember seeing it when it came out. Yeah.
And most people just totally hated it. It was a clash. You're going to see this magnificent historical film, and you're going to see a soundtrack that it was so mired in 90s disco that they just didn't see it too. So anyway, we were asked with about 2 weeks' notice to come up with a score for Metropolis. I had seen the film. I knew that it was a fabulous film, really appropriate for the kind of junk percussion. That's something else I should explain. Our band is sort of based on playing found objects, horseshoes, plumbing pipes, pots and pans, anything that makes noise that we can make musical. And with the whole futuristic sense of Metropolis, but based in sort of 1920s industrialization, it just felt like what our drum set looked like. So anyway, we said yes instantly. We had about 2 weeks to put together a score. It was highly improvised. We wrote some themes. We rehearsed we worked very hard for a couple of weeks. We knew where the themes would start and stop, but we had a lot of flexibility within those themes to improvise. And we were scheduled to do a weekend's worth of shows, actually Friday through Monday. And we did that. And the first show was on Friday, and it was well attended by our standards. There was probably 50 or 100 people in this 600-seat theater. And each subsequent show, the audience increased. And there'd been no advertising or anything, because this is the days before internet. Word of mouth had spread the word that this was a really cool event. And by the time we finished our run on a Monday, we had sold out the 600-seat theater. And the three of us, Terry Donahue, Caleb Sampson, and myself, were absolutely sold on this. We knew this was an astoundingly powerful combination of media that comes together and is greater than the sum of its parts, and was moving and exciting and live. So that just launched us on this career.
So the films that we're screening tonight are a very particular breed. They are experimental films or cartoons, genres within genres. So the first one has the title, The Acrobatic Fly. So talk about that a bit and why you chose this particular musical accompaniment, because this is, when I first saw this, prepping for this this talk, you always think of techniques as being relatively modern, but this is an example of microphotography that is used in scientific videos all the time now, but it was there from the beginning. So talk a little bit about your matching the music to the image here.
Well, let me just say, first of all, these all come from a DVD that's available through Flickr Alley called Wild and Weird. And we set out to find films that broke the mold, that presented a view of silent films that was unlike what people expect. Most people expect the, snarling, mustache twirling villain to release the girl from the tracks, or this heart, rendering romantic drama, but there was everything else was going on. In the very short period of time, just over 30 years that silent film existed between its invention and the coming of sound in 1927, there were, I think, something like 100,000 films made worldwide. And just imagine that every concept that any crazy artist could come up with got realized as the film. So we set out to look for short films that explored the periphery of what we think of as the silent film world. This one by F. Percy Smith, as you said, you'll see it. It's completely lunatic. I don't even know how to describe it. It just grabbed us. We love this film. It's so unusual. And then we needed to make music for it. And typically, Alloy Orchestra writes very elaborate scores. We spend months just working, going through scene by scene, improvising, coming up with ideas between the three of us, which is very unusual that we actually compose together in a room. And when we have an idea we like, we tape record it, we move on to the next one. And then over a period of 2 to 3 months, we just go over and over these scenes, refine the ideas, throw some bad ideas out, and compose music. That's not what we did on this one. When you see this film, you'll see that it's a different kind of film, and it kind of begged for a different style of music and a different way of making music. So we improvised on this one, start to finish. We talked very little about it. We just set the video going, had microphones and recording equipment ready, and we just improvised straight through it. We were really happy with what we did. We thought, well, that only took 4 minutes. Let's just try it again. And so we recorded it a second time. And in playing back just to listen immediately, I forgot to shut off one of the versions, and we listened to them both simultaneously. And it was, twice as good as in an individual performance. So this was a completely improvisational score, which is probably the only one looking through, I think, the only one that's really as completely improvised as this one.
Great, well, let's have a look at it. The Acrobatic Fly. We go. So Ken, there are probably weirder things on that DVD, but that is unique. And I should say to people who might have been concerned, this was years before the ASPCA was in operation. So that was an allowable film.
Yes, insects were harmed in the creation of this film.
So that was from 1910, I believe, that film. And we're going to move back now 2 years to 1908 for a short film called The Thieving Hand. And one of the things I love about your score for this is it opens with the theremin. So let's talk about that, the theremin and your approach to this film.
Well, I hate to have to do this, but I'm going to have to correct you. It is not a theremin.
It isn't, okay?
It's a saw. It's an analog. It's a saw, pretty conventional. It's played with a violin bow. It's not like a theremin. Terry Donahue, my partner in Alloy, plays it, and he insists that it's better than a theremin. It's got a richer overtone series. You can jump octaves in it in a way you can't do with the theremin, and it's completely indestructible when you're carrying it around the country or the world on airplanes.
So what instruments do you gravitate toward in scoring these films?
Well, we have a very specific instrumentation. There's, just so you're not confused, our original keyboard player was Caleb Sampson, and he passed away after about 6 years with the band, after we started to get our footing and were really playing a lot of shows. And since then, which is now more than 24 years, this is our 30th anniversary, we've been working with Roger Miller. So there has always been a keyboard. The keyboard is a so-called sampling keyboard, meaning that it actually has digital recordings of violins and cellos and basses, horns, percussion, whatever, but it can be a sample of anything. It also can create synthesizer sounds. Then the other two of us, Terry Donahue and myself, are both originally percussionists, but we have essentially adapted to what was needed in this band and learned a lot more melodic instrumentation. I play the clarinet, Terry plays the musical saw and the accordion, occasionally some guitar. So that's our group. The percussion itself is a variety of things. It's everything from what you think of as kind of orchestral percussion, like a giant bass drum, a snare drum, some tom-toms, triangles, and cymbals. It's definitely got a quality of rock and roll or jazz to it without actually ever being rock and roll or jazz. On top of that, there is what we call our rack of junk. The rack of junk is a large overhead tripod stands with a crosspiece, and strung from it are pieces of metal from a construction site in New York City, some plumbing pipes. I actually have two chimes that came from an original Wurlitzer piano or Wurlitzer organ out of a church. There's horseshoes, there's truck springs. So anything that we can make noise on, we do. So that's the genesis of the sound. The trouble for us is having to apply this quirky sound to a specific film. It's really great we have this ability to do all these sound effects and stuff. We have, you know, in front of us the ability to generate millions of different sounds, and that makes it really easy to do sound effects. But it's sometimes hard with all this percussion to do the kind of quiet, what you think of as melodic moments. And so we're always going back and forth between this junk percussion set and some of the conventional instruments, or allowing the keyboard player to just, you know, completely take it and put it into a thing. This is another kind of completely bizarre film. I don't even kind of know how to describe it. We proceeded with this one, as we do with all of our films. We watched it a few times in advance. We have this storyboard written out in front of us, and then we go through and we improvise ideas along with the movie, just letting the movie kind of wash over us and influence what we're going to play. And then we go through and we fix it up and we make it into a composition.
Before we start, what do you know about this particular film? It was really hard to research some of the background information on it.
Well, it's a film by the Vitagraph company. Vitagraph was one of the biggest silent film producers in the country. It was done in 1908, and the director is Stuart Blackton. Blackton was one of the original owners of Vitagraph, and he went out and bought an original Edison. So Edison was the complete monopolist of the silent film era. He was trying to take over every production site and make everybody use his cameras, projectors, and processing techniques. So Stuart Blackton went and bought an Edison setup, and within 2 months had set himself up in Brooklyn as a competitor to Edison. Produced huge numbers of films, both that he directed and produced. And this was one that he directed himself.
Great, so let's have a look at The Thieving Hand. here. So what I loved about that film is that in the weeks before I saw it originally, I had read Barry Sonnenfeld's autobiography, the Coen brothers, cinematographer and later a director for the Men in Black films. And he was talking about working on The Addams Family, his first directorial effort. And he went back to that technique of a live hand, not actually special effects. So you'd have the hand on black cloth that would then be married into somebody's arm, or it would move across the stage. And it was exactly the same thing in this film 100 years before. That's what I love about silent films.
Everything that's been done was done 100 years ago.
To that point, the next film is a really remarkable animation by somebody whose name is long forgotten, Winsor Mccay, who arguably invented the animated film in America. He was a comic strip artist for James Gordon Bennett and the New York Herald, and he had a series of very successful characters that he then turned into animated films. He would also do one of the great propaganda films of World War I, The Sinking of the Lusitania, which was hugely controversial when it finally came out. But this is all hand-drawn animation, thousands and thousands and thousands of drawings, carefully filmed and animated. How did you come across this film?
Well, all these films were programmed by myself and David Shepard. David Shepard unfortunately passed away a little more than a year ago. He was one of the great silent film collectors, one of the great silent film historians, and possibly the greatest silent film producer for videos. He would restore the films and then put them out so people could see them.
Let me ask you, Ken, were you a collector for Black Hawk films? When I grew up, I had a closet full of David Shepard's Black Hawk reconstructions.
No, I waited until the modern era to waste my family fortune on collecting silent films. So.
Okay, continue.
Knowing we needed to put together a show, many of our shows originate with the Telluride Film Festival, which is where I know Jason. We've spent many years hanging around the mountains of Colorado together. But this year we did not have a show at Telluride, and we needed to put together a program of our own that could be premiered somewhere else. We actually decided we were going to kind of build from a Dada show that we had done for the National Gallery of Art, which I think about 3 of these films were included in. And so I went to David Shepard, who's working with a guy named Serge Bromberg from Paris, who owns Lobster Films, and said, what do you got? I'm looking for the craziest shit you could put together. So, I'd seen some of these before. I had not seen the Thieving Hand. David recommended a lot of films. We watched stuff together. I suggested things. He looked at this. It took about a year for us to kind of whittle this down to this collection of films. So it's 2 hours worth of films on the DVD.
So talk about the music that you put together with this film, because Mccay is an amazing talent. We now live in an era of CGI animation, but in this case, you had an artist, the very small team, who was drawing frames. And as people, when they watch this film, will see, it had to have been a reference for King Kong 20 years later, but it just builds and builds and builds, and so does your music for it.
Well, that was the key. It's the building of this. I mean, this is a very tightly scripted film. You'll see how the main character in it is an animal of some sort, hard to say what, who literally develops throughout the film. And it starts off very kind of happy. He's a cute little pet that they take into their house. And so we wrote some sort of cute little pet music. We actually get along really well when we're writing music, and we tend to agree on a lot of stuff, but not always. And in this particular case, we had written, I think really Terry and Roger had written an opening piece that I just thought was smarmy and horrible and just happy, funny, friendly music, but I didn't think it was good. And I really lobbied hard to try to come up with some other happy, friendly music, but I was overruled. But we knew we needed to start at this kind of light quality and then build as the movie builds itself. And you'll see the build of the movie.
Great. So here from 1920 is Winsor Mccay's The Pet. So a special thanks to Jason and Ken there for providing you with your COVID-19 nightmare for the next couple of weeks. What an amazing film that is. And as a sort of palate cleanser, we have a short 4-minute film by the great German filmmaker and artist Hans Richter. Now, you may not know that name, but those of you who have been binging or streaming Babylon Berlin will have seen his creations in the opening and closing credits. And Ken, I really want to talk to you about this music because he uses the human voice in such an amazing way.
Hans Richter was a member of the Dada movement in Europe right around World War I, just before and running just after. And they were a amazingly creative group of musicians, very political, very sardonic. There's a lot of humor. Anyway, they practically invented avant-garde film. And they worked together on a lot of stuff. They also were one of the very early proponents of what we call performance art. So needing to come up with some music for Hans Richter's film, it occurred to me it would be suitable for, at least in the vein of what the Dadaists were doing, to take some poetry by one of the other Dada members from Zurich. And I chose the work of Hugo Ball. Hugo Ball, to me, is heroic because he would do these live performances, and the one prop he would bring with him was a giant bass drum. So that got me interested in him, and I started reading the poetry. So this is a kind of a mashup of a variety of Hugo Ball poems. We do this live as well. I have a series of his poems that I can flip through quickly in a book, and I read the lines that strike me at the moment, trying to get into the spirit of all of this. One of our early inspirations was, well, it needs to be run through a backwards reverb. So that's what's going on in this film.
Was there a particular line in the poetry that you fixed on for this film?
I'm afraid I can't think of one right offhand, but Blago Bung. So there's a lot of nonsense poetry in this. And for years after we did this first, we would all greet one another as we go into the studio, Blago Bung, or something.
So here from 1926 by Hans Richter, Film Studie.
Racing around a fireball is as a log of filth on which ladies' stockings are sold and Gauguin smiles one that nevertheless possessed of distinctions. Silk stockings, Slingen kasser full tops in the näset bag. The dustbins are growing fat. The dead rise up from within wreaths of flaming torches about their heads. Behold,
The dead rise up
from within wreaths behold the house. Behold the way the horses are bent over the waterway, lakes on behold the rivers of state. Behold the bone cancer, socabuano. Behold the placenta as it screams, aus.
So Ken, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the live experience, how you play off each other when these films are shown directly to an audience.
One of the remarkable things about silent films is the connection that they have with the audience. And it's partially because even without the live music, the audience is forced to actually become part of the movie in a way that talkies don't force you to. When you're watching a silent film, you've got to actually be thinking ahead or thinking along with it. What's going on here? It's not spoon-fed to you as it is in a movie where Tom Hanks is telling you what he's thinking about his soccer ball on his island. So that then creates this situation where the audience is really glued to what's going on. The second experience that really helps us is live music. I mean, we've all experienced concerts, whether they're rock or jazz or classical or whatever. They're very moving. They're very effective. They really suck you in. It's the combination of just the gorgeousness of the music, sometimes the volume, but also you're watching it being created at the same time it's actually being presented. And so live music with silent films brings these two media together, two mediums, and they become just doubly or quadruply effective. It's a multimedia experience, and multimedia, for some reason, just works with people.
And when you talk about this, you're so excited and passionate. What really moves you about silent film?
Well, you know, you just saw the Hans Richter film. I mean, imagine me up on stage with a microphone just screaming these bizarre obscenities, nonsense words into a microphone. It's so much fun to perform. In addition to it being fun to watch, being up on stage is just a trip. You know, and we had great audiences. We play all over the world, and you know, it's every musician's dream.
Right. So our audiences who have tuned in tonight are about to see one of the great gems of experimental cinema at the end of the silent era. It's called 9413, The Life and Death of a Hollywood Extra. And just to give it a little bit of context, three amazing individuals who had long careers in talkies collaborated on this film. The first was Robert Florey. Florey came from Paris, from an artistic background. He had apprenticed with both Georges Méliès, the inventor of the trick film, and Louis Feuillade, whose great serial Les Vampires and Judex were remarkable World War I era cliffhangers. His partner on it was Slavko Vorkapich. Now, you won't know that name, but Vorkapich later became the montage go-to editor and director in Hollywood. He edited the earthquake scene in San Francisco. He edited the beginning of the famine scene in The Good Earth. a really remarkable character. When I was going through USC Cinema, he was still teaching in the editing department. And the third talent on this film is the great cinematographer Greg Toland, who is best known for Citizen Kane. This was his third film and the first to really make an impact. And I know, Ken, you'll have some thoughts about the music for this. I think this movie does in, 13 minutes, what it takes Ryan Murphy 9 hours to do in the new Netflix film, Hollywood. It's just about the way the industry churns you out, spits you out, and then you're gone. So how did you come up with the musical language for this film?
You know, there's not a specific story for this one. We did it the way we kind of do all of them. We watched the film. I would have watched this film half a dozen or more times by this time. Oh, by the way, my wife, Jane Galili, who's a filmmaker and teaches film at the Tufts School of the Museum of Fine Arts, introduced me to this film. And she would show it to her beginning filmmaking classes, because not only is it an amazing film, incredibly gorgeous, but it was done in these guys' kitchen,
Right.
with no real equipment. There seems to be one light. Obviously, they have a decent camera. So the technology is all, up here. It's one of the most intricately constructed films, but it is not based on, technique or money.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about our music? I don't know. We just made music to fit it.
So here it is, The Life and Death of a Hollywood Extra. Enjoy. then as now, short films were the entree into Hollywood. 18 months after this film was seen by a small audience of people, Robert Florey, the co-director, would achieve mainstream breakthrough directing the Marx Brothers in their debut film, Coconuts. He would go on to direct Bela Lugosi in The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and decades later would become a go-to director for live television with things like the Zane Grey Theater, I Love Lucy, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So there is hope for people shooting films in their kitchen everywhere. Didn't you love that credit for the cameraman? Camera, Greg, not just Greg, not Greg Toland, one of the greatest of all time. So before we show our last and greatest film, I want to ask Ken, because I have one of these, do you have a favorite film of yours that you've scored?
Oh, well, we always joke that our favorite film is always the one we're working on at this moment, because the challenge of working on the film focuses your excitement and your energy. But given what's going on right now, we're not actually working on a new film. Probably my all-time favorite film is Man with a Movie Camera by Dziga Vertov.
And my favorite score of yours is for the terrific late silent 1928 MGM film, The Wind, with Lillian Gish, directed by Victor Seastrom. It's truly one of the great works of art, not only a great Western, but one of the great American films. And your score for that really brought that film out to a lot of people who never knew it before. So I thank you personally for that favor.
Well, thank you. Although I've got to say, very few people have seen that one. It's never been recorded. MGM, who produced and owns the film, basically shut us down almost immediately upon premiering it and doing a couple of shows. They had a really great score by Carl Davis, a British composer, one of the grandfathers of silent film accompaniment. And they clearly just didn't want anybody else doing a score for it. And they basically made it unavailable for us. So thank you, MGM.
So let's talk about our last film, which is one of the great works of cinematic art, Buster Keaton's The Playhouse. Take it away.
Oh, well, Buster Keaton doesn't need much of an introduction nowadays, although there was a time after Buster Keaton made his films, he went into relative obscurity. His films were not lost, but they were not being shown, as most silent films weren't. And it wasn't until, I'm not sure the date, but it was 60s or 70s, they gave him an Academy Award, and they brought him back into the public eye. And he is now recognized as, if not the great genius of the silent era, one of the few great geniuses of the silent era. He not only was just an incredible performer, amazing slapstick artist, able to take these falls and whatever, but he wrote and co-directed all of these films. So these are like 100% Buster Keaton's insane mind.
So for those watching the film for the first time, the opening moments of this movie are extraordinary. Buster Keaton plays all the parts. And you have to understand that there was no special effects as we know them now when he shot it in the 20s. So if you see an 8-man act, and yes, this was a pre-woke time, and one of those acts is a minstrel act, you're seeing Buster Keaton in one part of the frame where they taped off all the other parts of the frame with black tape so it couldn't be exposed, rewound the film, shot Buster Keaton again, over and over and over again. Of all the directors working in comedy in this period, debates go on about who was funnier, who was more sentimental, Chaplin or Keaton. Keaton was by far the better director and truly one of the great directors of American film. And before we end our conversation, Ken, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, talk about your score for this, because it's really remarkable.
Well, the opening scene is Buster Keaton playing all of the members of the pit orchestra at a vaudeville show. And it's really fun for us to play. We like to think after all these years, we've kind of honed our craft and are really good at it. Well, what we set out to do in this opening scene was how to play terribly. We are a terrible orchestra. We're making all of the mistakes you possibly can. And it's really fun to do. So.
Great. So here is our last and greatest film, The Playhouse by Buster Keaton. It's been a thrill. Thank you all for watching.
Thank